President of NTS, and Chris Witt, our President of OES, is here. And welcome to our town hall. This is the third in our combined event with Women in Engineers, Brandy Armstrong and Liesl, and with NTS's Women Leadership in Technology and Science. And in case you haven't had enough to eat and drink, after we finish here, we have yet another reception. And that'll bring our early career and our students all back together for a final networking event where everybody's invited. So it's really a pleasure. For us, this is actually on the Marine Technology Women Leadership in Technology and Science. This is our 5th event. And the initiative is to highlight women in marine technology and science and create the opportunities for connecting, informing, and inspiring. And I will want to tell you that the root of this was with the GOMRI, or Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. Thank you. And to be able to highlight the science from the women, post Deepwater Horizon. So just before we get started, we're actually going to do something interactive on your phones. If you can get your phones out. I know we always tell you to put the phones away, right? And we're going to ask, and it helps us kind of set the stage here. And we're going to use something called Menti. So if you go to menti.com, and the Liesl, the code is 84531592. And repeat that one more time.
Wait.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yep. All right, we'll wait till we get ready to the website.
All right, I'm there.
menti.com, and it should prompt you to enter a code. And that code is 84531592. Thank you for playing.
Okay. All right, so our first question. Which sector do you represent? .edu, .gov, .com? And normally when we have a screen behind us, you'd see it all populate. Lisa
There we
will...
go. There we go.
Just the first question, just for the we're all kind of waiting.
Yeah, it takes a little
So
bit, right?
continue to tap dance here, right? Okay.
I'll do Havana.
That's right.
There we go.
What's the pink one? EDU?
So it's .com, .edu, .gov, .mil, other. I wonder who the .mil was.
I know who the other is.
The
other's me.
Me too. Oh, that's right.
No.
Nonprofit, yeah.
Okay, so our second question, what is your career stage? Student, early, mid, late, blissfully retired?
Is there another?
Unclear.
So then we have the early career, the mid career, and the LCOPs, the late career ocean professionals.
Depends on the day. Sometimes I feel
Right? You're not kidding.
Sometimes I feel exhausted.
Blissfully retired.
Very clearly.
Retired and loving life. You don't have anybody retired in this room. There you go. We're all
I failed
still active.
I tried it one day.
Come on in. So most of it is in the mid-career. That's good. That's good. Third question. We only have 4, so bear with us here. Have you ever experienced or witnessed gender bias in the workplace, in academia?
That's a surprise.
There's no no's, huh?
I'm going to be the unicorn.
Do what?
But there's some new.
There's some of
There
them.
are some
Yeah,
no's.
yeah. Okay, and the next one's actually, it's a Wordle, so if you have, please, in one word, share how it made you feel.
It being gender bias in the workplace.
Gender bias.
Correct. Yeah, if you've experienced or witnessed gender bias in the workplace, your academic institution.
you read the smaller ones? You can't see.
Absolutely. So, frustrated, deflated, degraded, unworthy, angry, bad, anxious, disappointed, uncomfortable, helpless, indignant, motivated. Kick some butt.
Good stuff.
I said that many times, it's just different words.
Great, well, thank you so much, and it is helpful as our panelists up here for them to kind of get to know you as the audience. And so it is certainly my pleasure to moderate with three amazing women here on the panelists. And I'm going to introduce all three, and then they're going to kind of start and give you just a little bit of background and perspective. So Miss Erin Keen, Field Sales Support for Seabird Scientific, obviously coming from that industry perspective. She also has government background. Dr. Cheryl Peach, Academic Coordinator, Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Dr. Jodica Vermeni, Executive Director, Schmidt Ocean Institute. So Cheryl from, kind of speaking on that academic perspective. Jodica, in this case, an NGO. All three of these women with great background. So Erin, I'm going to start with you to, kind of just give us a bit of background on the importance on the topic and some of the efforts that you are involved with.
Absolutely, thank you. So what brings me here today, as a woman in the field of oceanography, I have myself experienced sexual harassment and gender discrimination, like I'm sure many of you have, at a past workplace. It led to me actually filing a formal complaint with the EEOC and going through that entire process. And now I've been at Seabird for about 2 years on their sales team. I deal with the incoming leads there and help qualify. And also at Seabird, I am a sitting member on the Diversity and Inclusion Council that we have, as well as the 2020 and 2021 engagement team there. And I also sit on the Associate Resource Group for Women and Friends.
Great. Cheryl.
Same question, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, the background, the importance of the topic, and some of the initiatives that you're involved with. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and you all heard from Margaret Linen. I am late career, so I've been in the field of ocean science and geology, as Margaret has, for decades now. I count my tenure in decades. And while I think many things have improved since I was in graduate school and had experiences that can only be described as experiencing and observing gender bias in both graduate school and then subsequently in the workplace, I feel like a lot has improved. And I think there's been a lot of progress made. I think particularly now with the new generation of faculty that I see at Scripps, I have great hope. And yet, I feel like, you hear Erin's experience, there is still so much work to do. And so I see a lot of great things happening at Scripps. I think you picked up from Margaret, it's a work in progress. But I want to mention, just briefly, we have a wonderful group of students, faculty, and staff that engage in grassroots efforts to actually bring about change within the institution. So I'll just mention one example because it's relevant to this. Women and Minorities in Science is a grassroots effort, and it's a group that has self-organized and now leads many initiatives at Scripps to bring equity into the workplace. So it's wonderful to be here, and thank you all for being willing to put this bit of work into the problem.
Great. And Jodica.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me as well. So I'm Jodica Vermani. I'm the first executive director for the Schmidt Ocean Institute. And before this, I was at XPRIZE, where I was executive director for the Planet and Environment domain. My first recollection of bias of any kind was when I was 14 in school. And this is in the UK, and I had a choice at that age to choose which classes I wanted to take, and I decided to take control technology. Nothing wrong with that, we're all familiar with technology. And my teacher on the first day took me outside of the class and said, are you sure you don't want to do art? Now, I was pretty sure because I was rubbish at art. So no way I was going to do art. But I said, so of course I said, I think I was more afraid of art than I was of technology. I was the only girl in that class, and I think that's what his concern was. So I stuck to technology, and I have to say, he was an amazing mentor, and he looked after me. He made sure that I held my own. At the end of the class, there was probably about 15 of us. I was, in the top 4, well respected by all the other boys in the class. And so what that speaks to me is the importance of mentors, of not just women mentors, but male mentors as well. You need to have them throughout your life, and I have to say I've been very fortunate to get to this place with both. But I just wanted to put that out there for potential future discussion. But yeah, that's my first recollection of discrimination of that nature.
Yeah, so it is interesting, as we are up here and Erin in a different place in her career than Cheryl and I and Jodica between us, that we are still seeing that we've come a long way, but we are still seeing that there's challenges out there, and that's what these conversations are about. We have a couple of questions I'm going to throw to each of our panelists, but start thinking about your questions. We want to make this interactive. We're not on stage, right? So we get a chance to really kind of have this conversation. So we talked a little bit about it, but I am interested to, and I think from a practical perspective is, what are the measures that the institutions and companies are starting to adopt to protect people from the harassment and equity? And we can maybe expand that a little bit to get a good conversation going. Both, we are a seagoing, still a seagoing operation, even though we have our uncrewed vehicles, but extend that both in your institutions as well as kind of work going to sea. And so we'll kind of combine that. And Cheryl, I'll start with you on that question. I know Margaret teed up some of it, but it's also from your field work as well.
Yes, so, I have a long and varied history. I'm sort of like Margaret. I think most people are actually, not many people have that well plotted out career and they follow that linear pathway. And I've been stunned to find at Scripps and hearing people on career panels the same is true for them. I spent a lot of time out at sea doing undergraduate instruction for an organization called the Sea Education Association. So I had that background. I also had done some time at sea, also as a graduate student. And I had also spent some time in the field as a geologist, and I think, in fact, I have to say that was probably the place where I saw the most egregious behavior was on geology field trips. I don't know quite what that says about the different disciplines, but I think that in some ways the sexual harassment, the sexual intimidation reflects a power structure issue amongst advisors and advisees for those in graduate school or people in positions where they can exert control over you. I think a lot of people have seen Picture a Scientist. That's another example of that. And so just to give one example of what's going on at Scripps, I think this really constitutes a form of bullying. I think it's one of the most extreme forms of bullying because it really does sort of hit at the control, and so there's a very vigorous effort at Scripps to address that through anti-bullying workshops, and I don't know all the details of those workshops, but I think that institutions like Scripps and others are really beginning to understand and address that we really do need to be mindful, and not just mindful, but also proactive about putting measures into place so that when students, faculty, and others are in the field, that there are measures in place so that they have recourse, immediate recourse, and ways to address those issues. So again, I have to say, it's a work in progress. I really think we can't do a few things and then lose sight of the fact that this is going to have to be an ongoing thing before we really do reach the point where that behavior does not show up.
Yeah, so Erin, I'm going to come to you next, and then Jodica, I'll finish with you. So Erin, I really want to focus on where you are, with Seabird, but we'll go back. Erin and I have had a chance to have a number of conversations, where you were going out in the field for an agency, and I think Cheryl, talked about, there wasn't that necessarily that structure in place for you to go to somebody that could help you. And I don't, and I definitely want to move forward because I'm just so excited for the team here to hear what you've been involved with in Seabird and how much it's been such a positive experience. But could you just talk a little bit about that? You really, at least you expressed to me, you didn't know where to go and what an agency might be able to do to fix that.
Absolutely. So yeah, at a previous job, I worked with the government, and I was on a field team, going out and servicing things in the field. Obviously, most field positions are predominantly male. I was one of 3 women out of around 65 men out of all the 3 offices. And we would go places that are very remote, similar to going out on a ship for a couple months where you don't have a phone, you don't have connectivity, and we just felt, basically out in a canoe without a paddle. If something happened, there was no way to report it, there was no support, and it's just the breeding ground for, it starts with microaggressions and it goes from there, right? And so you need to have something in place where no matter what, you can report something, you can call it HR, and that was seriously lacking. And not even when it wasn't remote, when it was just in the office, things were happening, but we didn't have any HR on site. It was all over in DC, right? And again, that's just the breeding ground. It starts small, and it gets bigger. But I made the move to Seabird now, and really happy to report that our parent company, Danaher, and Seabird have really taken great strides to encourage and women to apply for things and to retain them, and just diversity and inclusion in general. We actually last year started the Diversity and Inclusion Council, and I'm a sitting member on that, and there's no head, and there's people from all across the agency, whether they're brand new or they've been there or for several years, or even our president sits on it. And we hold focus groups. We're really tackling issues and just pushing to have more diverse slates of hires. And we actually have a goal Danaher-wide to have 40% female associate percentage by 2025. So we're really pushing that in the forefront. Another thing we're doing is called the Day of Understanding. We're holding these once a year where we take time during the day, and every people leader does this with their team individually, and they talk about topics such as microaggressions, things like that. So we're really, having these discussions is so important. You can't just not talk about it. It needs to, it exists everywhere. No place is exempt from having gender bias, but we need to engage everyone, and also engaging men. That's another big part of this too. It isn't just, a woman's issue. It's a everyone issue, right? We need buy-in from everyone. So the Day of Understanding has also been a great push as well.
So Erin, you're in a for-profit company. But it sounds like you have a real welcoming culture that Seabird says, yes, we want you to participate in these types of activities. But you still have, and so just talk to us just a little bit about that, the culture at Seabird that allows you to take time from what somebody might say, your job at Seabird to do this. I find it refreshing, so maybe talk about just a bit.
Absolutely. Yeah, so, for Seabird, this is actually an initiative company-wide. We have metrics. We have to hit this. This is part of our job. Obviously we manufacture and sell equipment, but this is also just a metric just like sales. We're putting it at that level. It's that important to us. And even at my personal level, since I'm on the council, that's also, in my end of year rating as well. So it is part of my job, and it's accounted for. The time set aside to do this is respected. It's considered a very, very high priority.
Great, thank you. And so, Jodica, I know you've been looking at some very practical ways to improve, life at sea, and for those who are going to sea. And I'm really interested in your thoughts on that and what Schmidt is doing specifically.
Sure, yeah. So for those who don't know, we at Schmidt Ocean Institute, we have a research vessel that we offer at no cost to scientists and marine technology developers around the world to go to sea because it's very expensive. And last year we did a quick analysis of who sailed, and we found that our numbers were not greatly equitable in terms of, something like, I think 8% of all chief scientists across our expeditions were women. We didn't have great local representation, so we really deliberately sat down and created an inclusivity and diversity plan. And we put inclusivity first because it's really the opportunity, give people the opportunity to rise, is that inclusivity piece. And part of this plan, and this is the first public announcement of this actually, although we've had a soft launch with the last 2 expeditions, is that we are offering financial support for dependencies for anyone who sails on the vessel. So if you have family, children, if you have some other kind of dependencies, we have now a policy in place that you can, whether you're a student or a postdoc or whatever level you are in that at-sea piece, to just try and ease that external burden that you may face. And this actually goes back to what Margaret was saying, is it's not just, it's not just the science itself, it's what's around you as a person that's important, and to support and bolster that is what this, so I'm very happy to say that. I think we actually have people who've taken this up now, so this is so far we've had, we instigated this earlier this year, so we've had a couple of expeditions, and the next one I think we will start to see some uptake, and that's what we're doing.
So I do hope, Jodica, that does become, a model. So we've kind of warmed it up here. Do we have questions from our audience here?
Come on, audience.
We're just all blown away.
Yes.
I know.
Yes.
I'm curious if at any of your organizations you have any sort of like mid-level reporting tool for instances of gender bias or sexual assault or misconduct. I know sometimes like the highest level of reporting cannot necessarily match up with like the scale of the event and deters people from reporting.
Yeah, I can speak to that briefly. We have a Speak Up hotline that we have in place. That is, you can choose to be anonymous if you would like or not, but it's all hours, and you can talk to someone and decide, where you want to take it, and just sort of walk you through that process.
Yeah, as you might imagine, a large university system like the University of California has many structures in place for exactly this at multiple levels, starting with the ombudsperson, we have 2 adscripts, and then on up the chain in a whole variety of different ways through which people can seek help with those sorts of issues. So it's really a priority at the university, and that applies to scripts as well as part of the university system. So that piece is well established, long established, and I know from my own personal experience there over the last 20 years that I've seen it put into play, and it works. And they do take action and investigate and pursue issues when they're reported. So
Is there data collected at Scripps? I know we're struggling at Yale with this, looking for like a mid-level, but we want data to back it. So.
yeah, I'm not aware. I don't know, Lisa, are you aware at all of any data collection in that arena?
Maybe in the HR area for faculty and staff.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know. I mean, we could certainly find out, and Margaret would likely have known if she were here. But I'm not aware data collection at that sort of mid-level. But I do, I can state with confidence that I've seen the system in action, and it does work. And it's not that lopsided thing we sometimes all hear about, that horror story where people report and then it gets like swooshed away because the powerful person that was the one that was the offender exerts too much control on the system.
Great, so do we have another question? Okay, so we'll move into a little bit different topic now. So you talked about, finding mentors, and Jyotika, your class where you were the only young girl at that point, but then that professor became a mentor. So, how do you find a mentor where you don't have female in your leadership or in your workplace? So, Jyotika, do you want to start with
I
that?
actually just want to add, I was just thinking about the word lead, and I think what word I would have associated with that moment in time was it just made me more determined instead of frustrated, because, I didn't know any better, of course, but, I was just like, I'm going to show them all. So I think that, maybe I'm stubborn, I don't know, but I think that, that's what I got away from there with. But, that's not the only instance. In my undergraduate, out of a class of 200, I did physics at Imperial College. There were 20 women in a class of 200. So all my, my PhD in that class, in my lab there, I was the only woman. So I think it's, I think it's just, at least for me, it's proving myself to whoever it is, and being careful to choose who your mentors are. And you can ask around and find out reputations, and students will talk. And even in my academic career, students know who to avoid and who not to avoid as professors. And so, I was fortunate. I had someone who told me his first day in graduate school, don't find yourself alone with this person, and don't do this. And it was great to have that kind of candid advice. So I think peer-to-peer mentoring, if that ilk, has really helped me out a lot.
So Cheryl, I'm sure you find yourself as being a mentor as well as your career has progressed. You've seen a change in the types of mentoring that's out there. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about just kind of that general mentoring and how you try to be a mentor.
Well, I had mentors throughout my graduate career. Some good, some, let's just say, mediocre. But it is really important, and I think there's abundant literature showing that success in STEM fields is impacted by good mentoring, both a supervisory mentor as well as the peer mentoring. I think this is something that is increasingly making its way into academia. Lisa, who's also at Scripps, and I both are dedicated to this idea of helping faculty and others develop mentoring skills, so that they are not just thrust into a mentoring position without having some guidelines, some resources, and support for what it takes to really do that well, especially for a diverse group of students. I did want to bring up, because I think this hasn't come up, Margaret talked a lot about women in science and about diversity at Scripps, and it shows up more in the physical sciences than it does in the life sciences at Scripps. And so the issue is unevenly spread, and so I think it's particularly important to look at those disciplines, those disciplinary areas. And I just want to bring to your attention one that I've learned about at Scripps through some of the faculty there, called Empower, and it was an effort on the part of women in physical oceanography, recognizing that they were not in that guy network thing, and so they worked hard to create that for women in their field with great success. So that program's worth looking up, as it's both a mentoring program where it provided young women in the field with mentors, but also that all important networking part of things, getting to know, who's who, who's doing what, and connecting in those informal ways that allow you to collaborate and advance your career. So I think all of those things are important, and those constructs, let's just face it, at least historically, have existed for men and not nearly as much for women. And so I think this is an instance where, yes, mentoring, but we also have to focus on that sort of systemic level change, recognizing what that ecosystem is that makes people successful in our fields. So maybe a little off topic there, and I apologize, but I just think it's super critical.
And Erin, before I come to you, from what you've seen, Cheryl, I was in the Navy, and commissioned in 1981, and I'm at one of my all of my early duty stations. Very, very few women, and I was stationed at the Naval Air Station in Oceana with 13 or 14 fighter and attack squadrons, and I think there were 4 of us women. But the interesting thing was then, that we were going to start the Women in the Navy Network, and there was a lot of us who said, not going to be part of that, because we couldn't be over here doing women things, right? We had to be inside that that male domination. That's not like that today, right? And as we were talking about, the empower and impact. I'm comforted to see now, it's okay to have, that women's network, and that is also, part of, that larger whole, but, larger group. But yeah, it was like, can't do that because we're gonna, be looked at differently, right? So I think that has, significantly changed. So Erin, how have you had a chance to, find mentors, and what has your experience been?
Yeah, at Seabird, a great place to seek a mentor is through our associate resource group, the Woman and Friends. We actually have several of these. We call them ARGs, associate resource groups, for minority groups, whether it's of Asian descent, Latinx, things of that nature. And what's great is it's not just Seabird, it's at the Danaher level. So it's all of the opcos under there. It just opens up this huge network. So even if you work at a smaller company that maybe doesn't have that many women there, it connects you with people across the board of Danaher. And they offer all sorts of different workshops and ways to connect you with a mentor. They offer like brand new workshops. They also every year have a program for just, if you want training, to move up in your career, like career coaching opportunities as well.
Great. So we'll throw it back out to the audience. Have you come up with questions for our panelists?
Yeah, maybe a little bit back more to the diversity thing. Maybe not really a full question, more just a topic. But like, how do you balance the drive for diversity and the goals of inclusion with the feeling of like you got this at an unfair advantage, right? I feel like sometimes women feel like, oh, you got this position because you're a girl, or like you got this because they're driving for diversity. Like, how do you balance that need for diversity and like the overall in general we're going to include more women at some point? Eventually, it won't feel like that anymore. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, sometimes I think it's hard to get an award and just immediately like feel like, oh wow, this is a diversity thing.
Oh, yeah, you're lucky to be here comment.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know Jodica wanted to start us off on that, and then we'll come back down the panel here.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And actually, it's one that one of my colleagues, a person of colour, just recently talked to me about and asked advice on, because they were invited to be part of something that they felt was higher than what they were used to being invited to. And the question was, is it because I'm of colour versus my skills? And I don't think anyone wants to be on because they're checking a box. That's like we all, every single one of us wants to be on or involved in something because we have the skills, we have the knowledge, we have the ability to do something. So this is something that I've struggled with because I get 2 or 3 invitations a day to be on something at this point, and I really can't, I have to start saying, I'm sorry, I can't, and I start to suggest others I know to be on, because I know they have the skills, the ability. So what I would love to see is a list of people, of ladies who are, what their skill sets are, so that I can then say, oh, I can't be on this board or this panel or whatever, but here is someone with this expertise, this skill set, give them a chance to do this. But I think it's a really valid question because, and I think in a way, growing up, when there were not so many men around and this was not a topic, I feel like I was involved because of my skills, because it was almost the discrimination was in the other direction, right? So I feel like I scraped through and I'm in because of my background, at least I hope. I don't know. I'm assuming that's why I was invited to this. But I can see this now being a reverse issue for younger generations. And I think my hope is that when we have enough people, it's not even going to be a topic. I think the fact that we're discussing this is siloing, and I hope that at some point we won't have this conversation at all, because it will all be skill-based and your expertise and your knowledge base and why you're there. Regardless of gender, regardless of race, it'll just be normal. But it's a really, really good question, because that is something that is a hot topic of conversation.
Cheryl, did you want to add on to that?
Yeah, it's a very, very tough question, and I agree. I think, that the aspiration, of course, is to get to the point where that the people doing the hiring or making those decisions don't comprise, mostly old white men. But and I think we're getting there, and I think people can take some comfort in the fact that most, for example, committees that you would see in an academic environment, do try to, have a diverse committee. But I also feel like the other piece of that is, we have these traditional metrics, right, of what constitutes someone being excellent or being skilled or being successful. And I feel very strongly that, one of the things these entrenched, traditional, conservative institutions, not conservative in the political sense, but conservative institutions like oceanography institutions need to do is to think carefully about themselves and what it is that they actually should be valuing in the people that come into their organization. And so there are all sorts of things that I think need to constitute part of that decision-making process. And they're those things that aren't the box checking, like, they got a 4.0 in, all of their graduate classes, or, scored high on their GRE, or, whatever the metric is that is the traditional metric, and start looking at what people have done, how they've done it, and what they've had to do to be able to do it. And then I think we can get a little closer. And so I don't know that it fully answers your question about how can we help people not feel like they've been just a box that's checked. But I feel like if the institutions can, invert, and instead of looking outside at the people who they're hiring for their qualifications, look internally at the kinds of qualifications they should actually be seeking instead of the ones they've been using, that we might get there sooner. And I think once we do that and value that, then we'll be much closer to what you're talking about. And I think for a young woman or a young person of color who's coming into an institution, I think they need a good mentor to say, you are here because you are, you are smart, you're accomplished, you're incredibly persistent, you bring, so many things to the table, and I think that needs to be another part of the culture, the big cultural shift that we try to engender in our institution. So that was kind of long-winded. It's like calling for systemic change, on a grand scale, but I think we have to talk about that, right?
Yes.
Yeah, you want to follow up?
Yeah, just a quick, an additional piece. So we actually are focusing on inclusivity over diversity.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? And the idea that there is a distinct difference between the two. Diversity is oh, we need this box checked, this, this. Inclusivity is, let's get everyone in, if it's a job search or whatever it is, and go for whoever the best is, with those caveats that it's not always 4.0 or this, that, and the other. There are other skills that we're looking for. And so I think that inclusivity leads to a pipeline discussion of how do you broaden and enhance that marine science and technology pipeline. And that's what some of our other initiatives and policies are addressing, or are going to start addressing, with the entire pipeline versus just the diverse box, so that it can expand.
Yeah, Jenica, pick up on what you said, and also maybe try to give you a bit of practical advice. I too would like to have that list with the women for out there, so that I can reach out and highlight more women when you get asked for panels, right? And so I think that is something that we can practically take on. I don't think we're ever going to be able to, but part of it is when, if I get something and I think that it's that intrinsic, I don't know personally if I'm good enough, right? I'm we call it imposter. I didn't know what that term was, and I always thought, okay, can I just get through this one more month of my job, and I won't mess up, and then I'm the director of something, right? So part of that is, we think that the person who nominated you, who hired you, they may not have those thoughts, right? You may, because I've done, I've internalized that. So, as we've heard in the institution, quickly find your allies, right? And so, and if you get invited to a panel or a meeting, and maybe you are that, they check the box, sit at the table.
Mm-hmm. And be good.
Yes.
And the next time, it'll be you're there for your
that's right.
talent.
Yeah.
Exactly. You might have me here because I'm a box, but guess what? You're not going to hear from me, and I'm going to be part of this. And that's how you also gain that confidence. And we had one of these discussions with the head of the National Ocean Service and the new director for the Earth Science Division at NASA. And we'll kind of come into this next topic of, how do you go into a meeting and you are either going to get ignored, or your ideas are not going to get picked up, and there are little tricks on, knowing who else is going to be in that meeting and have an ally, so that you're bouncing things off of each other. So from that perspective. So, we talk about, kind of, you brought up the topic of, I'm here just because, but what about those behaviors and those microaggressions, and how do you balance that, I'm here and I'm not being listened to, and I'm experiencing those microaggressions. What are some tips and tactics? And Erin, I'll start with you, because I know that we talked about this a bit earlier.
Absolutely. In my opinion, I honestly think that no microaggression is too small to be acceptable, because it's like a disease, right? It starts small, and then people think that's okay. Push the limit a little bit, and they still think it's okay, and then before you know it, it's blown up, and you hate coming to work. It turns into a hostile work environment, and it just becomes so toxic, right? So I truly believe that, as long as you just address it in a professional manner, just pull them aside, good eye contact, be like, hey, I really didn't appreciate how that came off. I know that maybe you didn't intend it that way, but that's how I perceived it. Don't attack them, but just say that's how I perceived it. Please don't do that again.
So Cheryl or Jodica, some of your experiences and in dealing with this, and if not, we can kind of move on from it to a different topic. Yeah.
So it always struck me, actually, I think it was in President Obama's era, that I believe this is the story anyway, is that the whenever the lady suggested something at the table, and I've had this happen to me tons of time, where it's been my original idea and then it's been rephrased in a more forceful way. Look at all them nodding.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't I just say that?
That's when you said, that was a great idea.
But it's
That's how you get your
rephrased,
idea.
it's more forceful. I don't know, the frequency of my voice wasn't, I don't know what, but what I loved is that somebody would immediately jump up and say, oh yes, so-and-so's great idea. So there was a backup.
Yeah.
Very subtle, very easy, great. And I love that idea of how you get that, because it is awkward to say, hey, this was my idea first, and weren't you listening to me? It's, there is all this power play.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's one thing. And then I just want to mention at X Prize, we had a he for she movement, which was great. A little hashtag he for she. So we started with, women in X Prizes about technology. And again, it was like, well, wait, but we also want the guys in the room. We also want to have, it shouldn't just be just the women fight. It should be like, this is for society in general. And so we actually had 2 co-leads of this, one a he for she and one a she. So a he for she movement. And so it was all done collectively, and it was really nice. So anyway, those are just a couple of things that I've stumbled across.
So I noticed that when Jodica, did make the comment that, you come into a meeting and the idea has, you say an idea, and so, but we joke about, we all kind of laugh. But I'll open it up. I know we've got some folks who have, you expressed that you experienced this. What are some of the tactics that you've used? And I know I can ask Lori to, respond, and Jill, just a couple of tactics that you used.
So one of the things that I've found is very successful is once the idea has been stolen away, to bring it back around to further the idea. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you do have to just give it up, and that the idea is going forward. And it's unfortunate, but sometimes you're in a group that's the way it's going to be implemented. But bringing it back around to, and what I meant when I said, and then continue with the next piece of that idea and growing it.
Jill, did you
I don't know that I have found a successful tactic, except as I've gotten older, and you and I talked about this a bit last night, as I've gotten older, I've gotten less tolerant of that behavior, and I'm just done with it. And so I just get pissed off and say, I think I just said that. And that wasn't me 20 years ago. And so it's really interesting, Jodica, to hear you say, when that happened to you at 14, you left determined. And I can see that's the attitude that you have carried through your education and career. But I'd be interested to know from Erin and Cheryl, if you had a similar experience, what your wordly was, and what was that turning point for you? Like I said, for me, I think it's just what we talked about. Remember last night? You just get done, right? You're pushed over your edge, and maybe again, it's older and less tolerant. Just too much work to do to put up with these things. But would you have used the same word if you used a different word? What was that sort of turning point where you finally said, okay, I'm done, and I'm not going to take this, I'm not going to tolerate this anymore? And then, put it back to you all. What tactics then did you use, or do you?
For some reason, this anecdote springs into my head, and it's not related to somebody taking an idea, but I was chief scientist out on a sailing school vessel cruise. So with undergraduates, and there's a captain and a chief scientist, and at any rate, I was working on something in the science lab, and I was using tools, and the captain actually took the tool out of my hand, like reached over and took the tool out of my hands, and I remember being like, okay, I'm done. like you just don't do that. Give it back. Yes, I'm sorry, it was awful. But anyway, I was not, at 14, I certainly was not. I would have been like, oh.
It was the fear of art, okay?
But I think, so there are people that are not going to be the ones, like Margaret said, right? Margaret said, I sent for the application to Scripps, and they wrote back and said, are you sure you want to be in a program that's this rigorous? And she didn't write back. And there's a lot of people out there that won't write back, that won't, so I think the concept of allies that you brought up earlier is so important. We all need to stick up for each other. I don't care, who it is, but when we see that happening to someone, it's not male, female, person of color, anything, but when we see that happening, I think the important thing is to have strategies as, more experienced people, or maybe people who have more, early in life chutzpah, for lack of a better way to put it, to just pipe up, right? Don't leave it up to the person to look like they're being, but that was my idea. That shouldn't be their job. That should be somebody else at the table.
Right.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
So yeah, I agree. That's what I do, is I keep track of where the ideas came from to make sure it doesn't matter who you are, male, female, whoever it is, that's who the idea came from. But as someone now in my position, if I see someone taking someone else's idea, I have now a mental image of what that person is like, and it's not favorable.
Yeah,
right? So that is the other side of that coin, is don't do it, because people are watching, and it may not stand you in good stead going forward. So now, if I see something, then I'm like, well, what about all the other ideas they've had? Are they really their ideas? Mm-hmm. So it actually so that's what's going on in my head is, as far as taking ideas goes. So, I don't know.
And you can be subtle, that's actually makes it more fun if you're subtle. So it's kind of like, did they really just
Yeah,
So,
please.
so I've been in experiences where we were as a field team, and we're trying to fix something, and the person who is running the project wasn't listening to me, and he would I'd be like, oh, I think it's this, I think this is what's wrong, and it'd take him 10 minutes later, he would realize what was wrong and be like, oh, this is the problem, yeah, I said that, you weren't listening. And so I was friends with some of the other people who were on the team with me, and I got to the point where I would tell a guy who was a little bit older, hey, I think this is what was wrong. And then he would announce, I think this is what's wrong, Melody mentioned it, and then they listened to him.
Awesome.
And I'm like, okay, well, this works at least to resolve this problem 10 minutes earlier because you're listening. But it's frustrating, but it is a way to at least get your point across, is relay it to somebody else that's maybe more highly respected, that you also have the ally with, you can trust that they will back you in the end.
I experienced exactly that when I was out in the field, sort of the old school versus new school, plus you're a woman, so it's tick, tick, right?
Yeah.
We've done it this way forever, and you're like, well, we could try it this other way. And like you said, allyship is huge, but they don't steal the idea, they echo, and then they put it out there, that was definitely a tactic I used.
That's interesting.
Yeah, because I already said it 10 minutes ago, but no one was listening to me. But then, another field crew member comes up, Erin had a really good point. We should try it this way, and you're not alone anymore. You have a team member. And then, we would move forward from there. As far as my breaking point, I have a similar thing with the tool.
Yeah. The tool thing. Hey, I know what I'm doing. Okay, back off.
Yeah.
Back off, I'm a scientist.
Exactly.
I am dating myself.
We were installing water level stations at where this occurred, and just because I'm a girl, everyone assumed I didn't know how to use a drill. I didn't know how to use any power tools. I just girls don't do those sort of things. But believe it or not, yes, I know how to use a drill. And yeah, he took it out of my hands before I even started drilling into the concrete, and was like, "Whoa, let me do that. You don't know what you're doing." And very old boys club style vibe where I worked. And the absolute breaking point where I actually started the internal investigation was After I was married, there were some comments surrounding when I was going to become pregnant that were said around and to my face. And this was only a few years ago. So, and another tactic, so not so much stealing an idea, but interrupting people. Interrupting women was a big thing that I've experienced as well. And I actually got an idea from a podcast that I listened to. It's called Battle Tactics for Your Sexist Workplace. Highly recommend it. And in the middle of at meetings, I started doing tally marks every time I was interrupted. And at the end of the meeting, it takes guts, but I spoke up and I'm like, I've been interrupted this many times. I'd like to make sure that my ideas are heard, and I'd like to have the floor now.
Good for you.
Yeah. So, we talk about it from a woman's perspective, but it can also be from those who don't have the experience. So if you're a woman and you are younger at that meeting, and so and you're right, it's incumbent on those of us who have been around to ensure that if we truly want to be, and I like that, Jessica, inclusive, then we need to be inclusive of the ideas. And, we're really excited at MTS that we are very anxious to have our early career ocean professionals part of our organization. Although yesterday on the panel, the term career, that was an interesting discussion. I'll go over that very quickly after I finish this. And that we had 3 individuals that we challenged them to bring ideas back to the board on how we would include ECOP, and it was have a vice president, have a section, support the ECOP and our various ocean committees, and have them on the committee. And I had the pleasure of actually working with the team to put the presentation together. And I knew that I had at least, for sure, two, actually 3, and one probably mine wasn't going to be changed. So I knew that the one thing that I needed to do to help the group was make sure that presentation, A, was as good as it could be, and that B, these are the kinds of things they needed to answer in the presentation to make it successful. Because I already knew that they were going to be phenomenal as briefers, but I have to tell you, we were never going to get one person to change, and we knew that, but luckily we didn't have to have. But after, and it wasn't on the ECOP, but it was putting a new vice president on the board, and I was really adamant. We were going to put our money where our mouth was. And if we're not going to have, if they're not going to be on the board, then we're checking a box. And I will tell you, after they did the presentation, the others who were not sure on that particular part were convinced. But I did feel that, to make sure that they didn't come into that, that meeting, at a disadvantage. And, we have an amazing board at MTS now. But I am mindful, and, that when our Vice President for Early Career Ocean Professional, extremely articulate, I think you all know Alfredo, but I really want to make sure that we stop and we always discuss that particular topic when it's brought up. And I've got good allies in Liesl and Josh, to make sure that we're doing that. So that's what we try to do. Do we do it perfectly? Absolutely not. But it is something, and I will tell you, it's been coming through these panels, that hearing how this perception is out there. I mean, it's helped me. It's helped me be a better, board president by being a bit more mindful. So other topics that we want to raise or questions. Yes, Chris.
I got a
Chris and then Gabriella. Chris,
I'll
yeah.
try to ask a question in the other direction.
Yeah.
I was the one who said I've never experienced gender-based discrimination. I've probably observed it, but I've also probably been, unobservant a lot of times as well. But I have noticed, I do work with a fair number of women, and often I'm the more senior person. And sometimes, there's a problem that comes up, even with some time pressure or some other stress that requires us to take action quickly. And people are suggesting solutions, and maybe I don't know the solution, the right answer, but I do know that, that suggestion just isn't going to work. And while I think that I give feedback in a positive way, are there things I should look for or avoid or do differently when I'm saying to a woman, I'm not judging them, their idea because of their gender, but it's just technically, the great suggestion, that's not what we're looking for, that's not the answer we need right now. Is there things I should know or avoid or do differently in that scenario?
Yeah, I have a comment on that. I think the first important thing is to acknowledge it and thank them for bringing the idea forward, because you don't want us to feel like you're squelching them, right? So the first thing, just thank you so much for taking initiative and bringing this to me, and then just explain why it won't work. That's the key. Don't just say we're not doing it, but give the why, and then even offer why, how you could possibly improve that idea, or offer to have further discussion at a later time.
Yeah, this is part of, being a mindful mentor. I mean, really thinking about how you mentor people who are younger than you are. Again, I don't think it's gender specific at all, but just what is your interaction and how do you communicate? How do you communicate your expectations? How do you communicate in ways that are supportive and encouraging, to your point? And so I think that's what when we all talk about mentoring, it's finding resources or doing some reading about well what does it take to be a good mentor? And I think that kind of information would help you shape. And I know sometimes it's that time pressure, that hurry that cause sometimes friction, because people don't have time to, or feel like they don't have time to communicate in a specific way. It's like, no, we can't do that. We need to move on and do it this way because we're in a hurry. But I think, again, conversations like this, or having conversations maybe with some of the people that you work with about what might work, just open conversations, are really helpful. It's a process.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, and I agree very much with both of the comments here. Acknowledging, explaining what. I actually also, just to add to that, I actually asked them why they came to that idea or how, because I don't have the same perspective sometimes. So I'm for example, I don't have children, so I don't have the need for dependent care, etc., etc. But others obviously do, and they need that. And so I kind of like to ask why, so I understand a bit more where they're coming from first, before saying why I don't think it works.
That's good. To try to understand that other side and those other perspectives on
and
this
I have
context.
changed my mind based on those conversations, actually.
Great.
Whereas I go in thinking, great, but no, we're not doing this, and then, actually, maybe it is.
It's probably worth the time too, because if you squash someone, then they're not going to bring you their ideas after that, and then you'll miss out on all of the good things that person could bring, even if they don't bring the right idea at that moment.
Well, these have been great suggestions. I was thinking of a very specific technical scenario where it was actually a cut and dry right or wrong answer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And in that particular scenario, I also have a good working relationship with that person, so I know that they don't feel like I'm shutting them down in the future.
Yeah.
But it's been some good thoughtful looking.
Call that a teachable moment.
I think also what might be cut and dry to you might not always be cut and dry to them, too.
Yeah.
Well, I knew enough about the technical topic to know that they didn't know what they didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I kind of we had to move on and know that answer isn't going to help, but I really appreciate that we're all trying to solve this problem. So that was a pretty specific scenario, but the general answers actually were quite helpful.
And then do that, and then that follow-up
Yeah.
Gabrielle.
Set aside some time just to openly discuss it with them. And, they usually don't even know it happened, but then that way it's a learning experience for everyone involved.
So Erin, I think you, and we're going to start to wrap up because there's a couple more, some mentee, a couple things as I heard both Chris, you talk, and Erin, first, what is that relationship and what is that respect, right? Is there a trusted relationship and is there that respect back and forth so that when you made a comment, you have enough trust that you can go to that individual and say, I am sure you didn't mean that in this way, but I took it this way and they're going to learn, but you have to have that trust. When I think you're in a situation where it isn't a trusting relationship, and it's hard to do, and every case is different, is to try to stop maybe and reflect, is this, truly because of a gender issue, or could it be something else, right? I don't believe in ignorance as a defense anymore. I'm done too, right? Ignorance is no longer a defense. I'm sorry, right? But I do think that, that your background and the language and how you communicate, that is part of you. And so first, I do urge, to step back and say, is this really, was that really a subtle dig? And then if it is, I think that we've heard in both, from Jodica's perspective and at Scripps and at Erin, these affinity groups, these peer groups, and they're being done not in a hierarchical way, if I understand correctly. It is being done so that you're no longer there alone. Because alone, it's tough anyway, whether it's you're alone or not. But alone is insurmountable. So I really think that, this topic has been talked about and these groups are forming. And it's not perfect in all the organizations, but there are a lot more individuals in all these organizations you can now go to. And so I think there is optimism. So we'll do just a real quick lightning round for our panel for kind of your final thoughts on this. We got a mentee poll, and then we want to talk about just some things that we have coming up in the future, and then we'll go have more food and drink because we certainly haven't fed you enough all week. Yes. So Cheryl, you're in the middle. Have you go first. Final thought. Parting comment.
I think that speaking, from somebody in academia, that institutional change is the first order of business. That cultural change at the institution to create a culture where people's lived experience, to use Margaret's word, are ones that keep them in the field, and that's the responsibility of the institution. It's not the responsibility of the people that you bring into the institution. So the change, you need to take a big long look in the mirror and figure out how to shift and make that environment inclusive and equitable for everyone.
Great. Erin?
Yeah, I think, as you said, it's an institutional change. I think more companies need to understand that pushing for diversity and inclusion, not having it feel like checking a box and having it really be at the forefront is huge. And the more companies that do that, we will finally start to see change. Because I feel like a lot of it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we don't see women in these jobs, people coming up don't have people to look up to, right? So, and that may mean, okay, maybe sales are slightly down because we're focusing on something else, or maybe it takes longer to fill a hiring spot because we need a more diverse slate, but the cost is worth it, right? And, we need to have science being done, by the people who are using our data. We need to be representing everyone.
Right. Okay, thank you to our panelists, and we're gonna go back to
Don't forget Jody.
See, I've got my allies keeping me. But Lori's had the job of keeping me out of trouble for many years, so she just has a hard row of it. Thank you so much.
I just figured you were focused on the drinks ahead. Yeah, no, I mean, I just want to, I really think it's about giving everyone an opportunity, regardless of background, like I said, regardless of gender, etc. But there are people, there are areas of society that have not had that opportunity. And so that's what we're trying to work towards, and that's to try and change that pipeline from throughout. And I think we announced a partnership with MTS and IEEE OES today, yesterday. And part of that includes, women in marine technology and students in marine technology and collaborations. And so it's really that opportunity. Can we make that shift for everyone?
Great, thank you. Now I've gotten them. But I think that isn't, important. We have developed rapport here. Jodica knew that I didn't do that, purposely. But if we didn't have that rapport, right? And I also had the confidence to say yes, laugh at myself, right? For making that mistake. And that really also comes with, yes, having that confidence in your ability, having my ally in the audience, and so I do think it.
They're my allies.
Your ally. That's true. Your ally. Yeah.
Long time ally, new ally.
Let's get this straight. But it takes that, right? And so now, Lisa, we are going to back to Menti, correct?
Yes,
all right. We don't have two questions, so we'll go back to Menti and the code. Well, you should have already had the code in, right? Or do they need it again?
You might need to refresh.
Okay.
Probably not, but just in case, again, it's menti.com. 8453.
The glasses have to come off.
I know.
Yeah, I didn't wear these before COVID.
Wait, hold on.
I'm sorry.
Mine's loading again.
Sorry, Lisa, I interrupted you.
Cut me off. 84531592. 84531592.
Bingo.
You win a prize.
And the question is not open yet. Is that correct? We're still on the waiting.
Oh wait, there was a problem loading.
Okay.
So
I got one.
Sorry.
Yeah. So
My hamsters are working hard here.
So what topics would you like to learn about?
Can we select more than one?
Absolutely.
Yep, you sure can.
It only
You should
lets
be able
you
to.
select
Oh, it'll allow. Sorry.
I'm
No,
having
it's only
trouble
one.
loading.
You can yell at me when you learn how.
It's okay.
I can't pick one.
You can tell me later if it's not working.
Ooh.
Oh, there they go. Now the dots are flying.
Sorry, mine's not loading for some reason. Trying, refreshing.
So what we do is, I don't have your personal information, but each time we run these sessions, I collect this information, and this has been driving the topics and the information and the methodology for interfacing with everyone.
Yeah, right, there is no personal information. We're clear on that, yeah. Okay, what are we saying there, Lisa?
It looks like everybody a lot of people are interested in earning inequity and entrepreneurship and innovation, work-life balance, gender balance, retention of women in STEM.
Okay, and our final question is, how would you like to engage? We've got webinars, workshops, social media. Purposefully connect, what was the, not networking, but
intentional connection.
Joshua came up.
Yeah, what did you say?
where was Joshua?
I'm not taking his idea.
Yeah.
Call it intentional connections.
Intentional
Yes,
connections.
instead of networking.
He's already doing it.
Interesting.
What about accidental?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can make them intentional.
Okay, great. So networking, interesting you say that.
That's
We
right.
have a networking reception.
Did we say that?
Will there be food?
You can count on it.
Seriously, really, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to each of you for taking your time, spending your time with us, and discussing this, because we are committed to inclusivity, both at the Marine Technology Society and the Ocean Engineering Society of IEEE. So we really do want to keep this going. We do have a LinkedIn group, so please consider joining that. And
And a QR code if you want to snap that later to join.
oh, right, because we normally have the
Is that at
screen
the
there,
end?
yeah.
Oh.
And we are starting a webinar series, and we have talked about, and we're very thrilled that on the men who have joined us in the audience here, but on the 13th of October, we have a webinar. It's no cost. We don't need saving. We need allies. And our panelist is Dr. Brad Johnson, Professor of Psychology in the Department of Leadership, Ethics, and Law at the United States Naval Academy, and a faculty associate at the Graduate School of Education at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. David Smith, an associate professor of sociology in the College of Leadership and Ethics at the United States Naval War College. And I think, and our third one, do we have a third on that, Lisa?
We have Brian McCormick,
Yep.
who is with Hummingbird Humanity, and Andrea Tatum, who is the founder of AGD Diversity. So we have 4 panelists. That
Great, and so, we hope you all will help us build this community of inclusivity. And on that note, Lisa's going to help me say thank you to our panelists here, because we really appreciate it. And she's going to talk about this, I'll let you talk about it.
Sure. Yeah. In a partnership with Ingenium, which is an organization in Canada, we did a bunch of events through the UN Decade this summer, and they offer this program where they have free posters online, but then they also have a card game, and not to be pedantic about it, but it's basically like Chutes and Ladders for a woman trying to establish a career in STEM. So it's really, really fun but sad card game. There's a lot of good and a lot of good things that happen to these women too. So what they did is focused on several women and actually traced their actual career paths and made like a card game out of it. So we'll be partnering with Ingenium in the future. The MTS logo will be right on here. We're hopefully translating into Spanish. It's already in French if you're interested. So you can bring this as outreach to as many young women and young men that might be interested in playing. So we'd like to thank the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I do have a few more to give away, but they'll be given away at the reception.
Oh, we're there.
Right. Thank you. But we will get a new set very soon that we can share more.
And again, thank you very much for our
Yeah,
panelists.
really.